Well, thank you very much, Ki Wong, and thank you to Susan Campbell and to the AIIA board for the invitation to participate in today's conference. Identifying meaningful patterns through the analysis of data is nothing new. In the 1850s, the physician John Snow famously identified the source of London's cholera epidemic through the analysis of data and pattern identification. Importantly, Snow's work was an early example of the power of data, the power of analysis and the ability to identify meaningful trends. This not only disproved the common theories of the day, it confirmed that the cause of the epidemic was the contaminated Broad Street pump. Now, while on-the-ground research is still very important, and I don't want to discourage any of you interested in public health to continue trawling the streets and sewers of whichever city you're investigating, I can say to you, fortunately, that there are now alternatives to doing that to find the data to make sound decisions. Modern technology, not least of which is the internet, is doing that for us, generating unprecedented volumes of information, of data to shape products and services and drive the quality and effectiveness of what governments and business can do. The opportunities presented by big data, data so large and complex that it would have been impossible for John Snow to identify meaningful patterns using traditional techniques, is possible because of several key factors. The cost of storing, transmitting and processing or analysing data is cheaper today and faster today than it has ever been. In the last 50 years, the cost of digital storage has halved roughly every 2 years. Storage density has increased 50 million times, and our ability to process that data has increased exponentially, doubling every 18 months. This has in part led to an explosion in the volume of data available to consumers, to business and of course to government. In 2013, the amount of stored information in the world is estimated to be around 1,200 exabytes. That's the equivalent, I'm told, of giving every person living on Earth today 320 times as much information as is estimated to have been stored in the Library of Alexandria. And it's important to remember this data is mostly stored in a machine-readable form, a profound difference between today's easy-to-access data and previous techniques used to collect and store data. Secondly, the explosion, the sheer volume of information has coupled with the similarly explosive growth in processing power has meant that the need to find a scrupulously accurate sample, the world of small data, has been overtaken by the availability of all of the data, much of it messy, but in volumes that new correlations can be found. In other words, quantity trumps quality. Until very recently, although data was considered valuable, it was either seen as ancillary to the core operations of running a business or limited to relatively narrow categories such as intellectual property or personal information. Today, all data is valuable in and of itself and to unlikely sources. What is the best predictor of an outbreak of flu? Important thing to know. Well, searches on Google for flu remedies. Government, while often slower to harness this value than the private sector, recognises the huge value, not to mention the opportunity of data. To understand the financial opportunities created by digital information, it's worth remembering that last year Facebook, a company less than 10 years old, was valued at $104 billion. In fact, the market value of the so-called new media companies like Apple, Google, Amazon and Facebook are more than 3 times that of the old media companies, Disney, News Corp, Comcast, Time Warner, CBS. This shows the tremendous value of companies, of social networking sites like Facebook, that not only collect vast volumes of data, voluntarily I should add, but those that are able to drive deep insights through the analysis of information. This not only adds tremendous value to their bottom line, but enables electronic service providers to deliver a richer, more targeted user experience. We like to think of sites like Google and Amazon as the pioneers of big data, but of course governments were the original gatherers of information on a massive scale. and they still rival any private enterprise for the sheer volume of data they control. All those digital bits that we have gathered can now be harnessed in novel ways to serve new purposes and unlock new forms of value, new opportunities. But this requires new ways of thinking and will challenge our institutions and even our sense of identity. The one certainty is that the amount of data will continue to grow, as will the power to process it all. I think there are two key questions that governments must ask when collecting and analysing data. Firstly, we must question how we can best use all this data to improve the way we run government, both in making government more efficient and improving the way we make evidence-based policy decisions. Secondly, we must ask who is best placed to exploit the data that government collects. Is this a role for government, or are industry and citizens, the public, more innovative and resourceful in extracting value from that data? One obvious example where government can deliver genuine value to the public is in the area of online customer services, an area where information, where complex data can drive deep customer insights. If those insights are harnessed in an intelligent way, and there's no reason they shouldn't be, we have a real opportunity for government to deliver more accessible and better quality services. We are unfortunately, however, behind our peers in the private sector when it comes to utilising technology, harnessing the power of digital innovation to deliver better and more accessible services online. This is particularly apparent when you look at the banking sector, with most of our banks conducting the majority of their transactions with customers online. In fact, Michael Hart, the CIO of the Commonwealth Bank, recently told me that the CBA conducts 95% of its transactions virtually, that is to say, over the internet. The key here is not that banks or even government are delivering more content and more online, although this is a good start. The key, and this is an important point, services are constantly evolving to meet the expectations of users. Gone are the days of 3 or even 1 year refresh cycles. Instead, user patterns are driving deep insights into the preferences of consumers, and this is allowing business and will allow government to deliver more targeted, better quality services than before. That is why we are committed to making available all major government services and interactions with individuals online, to make government more accessible and more efficient. That's the cornerstone of our convenient services, anytime, anywhere policy. Enhancing whole-of-government data connectivity and better use of data and analytics will provide even greater efficiencies and effectiveness. To date, there have been isolated activities to improve data sharing and connectivity between agencies, but we need a targeted and coordinated approach to transform the business model of how government agencies currently operate. So what does this use of big data analytics within a government context look like? A great example is the Australian Tax Office, recently nominated as the lead agency by AGIMO for a data analytics centre of excellence to better understand their client base and manage their engagement strategy. A data initiative I'm particularly proud of is the Department of Communications' My Broadband website, which allows Australians to find out the ratings of broadband availability and quality in their local area down to 78,000 precincts across Australia, based on analysis conducted at the end of last year. That website is a result of the Broadband Availability and Quality Report, which contained findings based on a spatial analysis and analytics of the coverage of broadband customer access networks, along with an estimate of their likely performance based on known constraints. This analysis used available information and measured broadband availability as a description of the infrastructure currently in place, and used the possible speeds achievable over that infrastructure as the measure of quality. As the NBN is rolled out, this data will be updated to reflect the rollout's progress. And of course, part of our commitment is to prioritise areas which are the worst served areas in terms of broadband quality. Now, that's an easy promise for a politician to make, you might think, but the first thing you've got to do is find out where they are. And this exercise, this broadband quality, availability and quality study that my department undertook and delivered in remarkably short time, is the first time the Commonwealth Government, despite how many years of politicians talking about broadband, has ever done the exercise of finding out where broadband is, good, mediocre, or dreadful. And that's a very important piece of work. And all of the data behind that is now available. So that is an exercise both in big data, and now it's an exercise in open data. Now, there are real issues facing government in exploiting data analytics within the public service. Access and retention of staff is one of them. Data analytics requires a new type of employee, one who has the right mix of technical experience, business knowledge, motivation, and importantly, technological imagination. Data infrastructure is another. Government purchasing and tendering processes don't lend themselves to rapid change and adjustment of IT infrastructure as technology evolves. This issue has really only been addressed sporadically by departments. We're moving to a more flexible approach that leverages the private sector to coordinate enabling infrastructure as government departments move into larger data sets and more complex analytics. Of course, one of the key issues for government, and that which is of greatest concern to citizens, is privacy. Big data raises new challenges in respect to the privacy and security of data. Maintaining the public's trust in the government's ability to ensure the privacy and security of the data it stores and has control over is absolutely paramount. The use of anonymised data, clear government policies on privacy and adequate IT security are all key methods currently being used within government to ensure we use data analytics appropriately to maximise service delivery and efficiency. There are a number of specific issues around privacy that need to be managed if agencies are to realise the benefits of big data, including better practice in linking together cross-agency data sets, better use of third-party data sets, de-identification of data and the mosaic effect, that is the circumstance whereby data elements that in isolation appear anonymous can amount to a privacy breach when combined, the necessary considerations to make before releasing open data, and data retention and cross-border flows. The second, and arguably more important question of how the government should use the data is how it can best be exploited for public benefit. It's important to remember that government's data value is latent and requires innovative analysis to unleash. But despite their special position in capturing information, governments, of course, are the only institution or organisation that can compel people to provide them with information. They are often ineffective at using it. Part of this may be because of the personal or confidential nature of the information government collects, health records, tax returns. But more often than not, it's a lack of imagination and absence of incentives to exploit the great value from data. The open data movement contends that the best way to extract the value of government data is to give it to the private sector and citizens to make it truly open. There's a principle behind this as well. When the state gathers data, it does so on behalf of its citizens, and thus it ought to provide access to society, except in a limited number of circumstances, such as when doing so might harm national security or privacy rights of others. We've already seen disruptive use of government data give rise to many real-time apps. One of my favourites is the New South Wales public transport app TripView, which allows individuals to track the exact time of arrival of a bus or a train or a ferry from their nearest stop based on real-time data. Now, this is a very significant thing. This is more significant than you think. For many years, when you talk to people, experts in mass transit, something that Canberra's not very familiar with, I might add, the thesis has always been that frequency has to be such that a would-be commuter does not need to consult a timetable. So, the buses or the trains got to come every 5, maybe every 10 minutes, so that they rock up to the station and they know that the train will be there. But if you actually know precisely when the train or bus is coming, and not only do you have a timetable, but you know that the 7:23 is in fact 8 minutes late and is coming at 7:31, then of course you can manage your day. You can make another phone call, you can walk in a more leisurely way, you can have a coffee or whatever. And so it enhances mass transit use at absolutely no cost to government, absolutely no cost to government, and takes some pressure off the need to have more frequent services because of that. Now, by making available its extensive data sets, governments, through open data, have this critical enabling role to play. Would that real-time app and countless others be available without free and easy-to-access government data? In many cases, the answer is obviously no. Now, unfortunately, in Australia, the private sector's interest in leveraging public data has been limited because of the lack of it. There simply hasn't been enough public data made publicly available, let's say government data made publicly available. We're committed to working, our government is committed to working with agencies to ensure the publication of data becomes a routine government function. Importantly, if we are to catch up with the US, which has published more than 200,000 data sets, we must ensure that data is not only published regularly, but in a machine-readable form. We're committed to turning around our slow start to empower the private sector to capitalise on the disruptive potential of information. The establishment of data.gov.au, the publication of the principles on open public sector information, have been important steps in opening up the data held by Commonwealth agencies for reuse. The current Australian Government's principles on open public sector information state that open access should be our default position. I don't need to remind those here today that it was Barack Obama on his first full day in office who issued a presidential memorandum, and I quote, that in the face of doubt, openness prevails when it comes to the release of agency data. And as recommended by the Government 2.0 task force, the information must be truly open. So unless there are good reasons, extraordinarily good reasons to the contrary, government information should be free, easily discoverable, based on open standards and of course machine readable, properly documented and therefore and licensed to be freely reusable and transformable, making to the to leverage this to drive new and exciting innovation. Many of activities mentioned earlier. We have an extraordinarily valuable national asset at our fingertips, one that should and will be used to drive new insights, improve access to information and underpin the types of services that are delivered. And I look forward to the communiqué the AIIA will be releasing at the end of this summit. Thank you very much.
Nigel Freitas, and I'm a journalist with Sky News, and I have a very simple job today, and that is to take your questions and put them to the Minister. So if you do have a question, please put your hand up and state your name and company, and we'll come to you in a minute. I'll kick things off today. Minister Turnbull, you talked a lot about the quantity of data that's being collected at the moment. Some people are concerned, though, that big data might turn into Big Brother. How much do you think the recent NSA spying revelations will damage the extent to which citizens trust governments with their data?
Well, I think the NSA, the Snowden revelations or allegations, is not really an example of citizens not being able to trust government with their data. It's not being able to trust governments not to interfere with or look at or record their data existing somewhere else. I think there has been something of a change of paradigm in relation to data. I firmly believe that the internet and the phenomenon of what is becoming increasingly almost entirely ubiquitous connectivity is actually changing humans. I'm not quite suggesting that we're turning into cyborgs, but it is genuinely changing us. There is already evidence that we are remembering less up here because we have so much data at our fingertips. But also, if you think about sort of basic paradigms of human experience, human lived experience, obvious one is that the default has been to forget. We all forget things. We've always had to go to a great effort to remember things, to write them down, paint them on the wall of a cave, commit them to memory, take photographs, put them in the family album, etc. Now that so much of our life is lived digitally, the default really now is to remember, and the problem is, can you actually delete or forget anything? So that's a really significant change. The other thing that I think that has changed too is that attitudes to privacy are very, very different. And I'll just, I haven't got any. What I'm going to share with you is what I would describe as anecdata. So this is not big data, this is anecdata. So hence a little bit unreliable. But nonetheless, in my line of work, you get quite used to understanding both the anecdata and the data proper. About a few months before the election last year, I had one of my regular politics in the pub meetings in a pub in Paddington in Sydney at the Imperial Hotel. And the topic was Snowden. It was the NSA revelations. And there are a couple of hundred people there, most Gen Y. And what astonished me was how little outrage there was, how little concern there was. The number of people that said, look, if the government wants to troll through my emails and, my Facebook entries and that makes me safer in terms of terrorism, I'm relaxed about that, I don't care. I mean, at least 2 or 3 people got up and said to general acclaim, look, I know Google reads all my emails because they send me these dumb ads, which I'd never click through. But more fool them. But I get a really good email service for nothing, and so it's a good trade. It was very, very interesting, and I have to say that I think a generation ago there would have been much greater indignation. Now, I'm not trivialising or dismissing the Snowden allegations or the concerns that people have about the role of governments and spying, and that's a whole other topic that we can. I mean, I gave a speech partly about that, if you're interested, at the cyber security, the National Security College just a few weeks ago. But it is. I think there is genuinely a very different attitude to privacy. I think the internet, as I say, it's changing many fundamental aspects of what it is to be human and our human attitudes.
Okay, let's go to the floor now for questions. If you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll try and get a microphone to you. I see a gentleman up the back here, firstly. We'll come to you.
Minister Turnbull, I certainly would not disagree with anything you just described about the changing attitudes towards privacy. However, do you believe that there's potentially a double standard that typically citizens will apply with respect to a commercial entity prying into them versus the government?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, for a start, the information that you provide to, Google or Facebook or any of these sites is information that you're providing voluntarily. You don't have to have a Gmail account, you don't have to use Facebook, etc. I think governments, people will expect a somewhat higher standard of governments. And that's why we take it very, very, very seriously. And this, I touched on the mosaic effect earlier. It's one that is worth bearing in mind, because there is a lot of, there's a lot of information that can be, you can anonymise data, but if you've got enough correlations, and we get back to the, to the way in which we've gone from, focusing on scrupulously statistically accurate samples to saying we don't have to worry about sampling now, we've got everything. So correlation is the key, not a sampling approach. I think all of that basically demonstrates that the force of what you've said, which is that governments have a higher standard. And yes, I suppose there is a double standard to some extent, but it's one that we accept and acknowledge. We do have to meet a higher standard in terms of citizens' privacy.
Okay, I did see someone with a hand up in the front, second row over here, please.
G'day, it's Julian Bykowski from Government News. Two quick questions. The first is on open data, which you mentioned should be free, but the government already paywalls vast extents of its own data holdings, including ASIC. I mean, as a matter of policy, would you be prepared to consider the rollback of those paywalls to make the data more freely available? And the second question goes to the other two really big data holders in government, one of which is Australia Post, the other one of which is Centrelink. Treasurer has made very conspicuous noises about merging those two.
Sorry, I don't know about everyone else. I'm really struggling to understand you. If you could just speak more clearly.
Okay. Both questions repeat?
Yeah, no, I've heard the first one, but the second one, yeah.
Okay, the second one is on Centrelink and Australia Post.
Yep.
Treasurer has made noises about merging those two entities, at least at the front end.
Yep.
They're both really big data holders.
Yep.
You're the Communications Minister. What's your view on the potential merger of those two organisations?
Okay, well, as to the second point, obviously these are matters of policy that we're considering. I think the context where Centrelink, Australia Post have a particular relevance is this. We all understand that Australia Post is a high fixed cost business, okay? And its letter volumes are declining year on year, inexorably, as they are with every post office in the world. So you lose $1 of letter revenue, that is a very large percentage. I won't say exactly how much, but it's extremely high percentage of that dollar comes straight off the bottom line. So that's, Australia Post has got some big existential challenges. You need about $3.50 of parcel revenue to make up for $1 of lost letter revenue. So, and that, that we're not seeing that. So Australia Post has very big existential challenges. Now, one of the factors that feeds into is the viability of post offices, and including licensed post offices. One way to address the viability of those post offices, or to support them, and of course to deliver better services, government services, is to use them as locations for the delivery of Medicare services, Centrelink services, recognising there are limitations in terms of expertise, but in other words, to deliver more trusted government services through that Australia Post network. And there's obviously a lot that can be done with, say, a video kiosk. I don't know how many of you followed what St George Bank has done. So if you go into a St George Bank, in a suburb somewhere, and you talk to the branch manager, who'll be very knowledgeable, but there will be areas, perhaps of superannuation and taxation that he's not familiar with. You can now, in many of those branches, go and sit in front of a video screen and talk to a domain expert at the St George Bank's head office. So there's a lot of potential for that kind of thing too. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at it we recognise we've got a big existential problem with Australia Post, and we're looking at how we can deliver better services to Australians more broadly and also address that. Now, the first point you raised about paywalls, look, there are issues there with existing paywalls and existing contractual arrangements. I have to say, as a matter of principle, I don't think the government should be charging the public for data. So I have to be frank with you. I think it is really regrettable that ASIC's data is behind a paywall. Now, this is, obviously these are tough and troubled times from a budgetary point of view, and there'd be all sorts of contractual issues, but really the productivity benefits from making data freely available are so much greater than whatever revenues you can generate from them. So we are certain, our goal is to, wherever possible, to make that data, as I said, accessible and free.
All right, ladies and
Now,
gentlemen,
can I
please.
just have one more, and then I really better go back to Parliament.
Do we have a question up the...
John Hilvert, IT News. Minister, you mentioned that you've rolled out an application that rates services in terms of good, mediocre and dreadful, I think. Has there been any attempt to validate that data? I'm raising it because I noticed on one of my colleagues is having trouble, for example, in Sydney, which has got reasonably good service, is getting a very poor service via the streaming. Has there been any attempt?
Sorry, again,
Sorry,
there's
okay.
something wrong.
To what extent have you validated the ratings that you have given for the various service areas throughout Australia?
What, the ratings of the various...
The broadband services.
So you mean, have we validated it?
Yes.
Yeah, well, we will be installing very shortly a speed test app that will be part of the My Broadband site. And so what people will be able to do is to go on and do a speed test, and that will then, now, obviously that, we don't have time to go into all the vagaries of speed tests, but obviously that's going to depend on time of day and, of course, what type of equipment they've got. There's a gazillion factors that affect your, the experience you have on your device over and above the line speed, if you like, between your, the end of the D side connection, between the exchange or the node in the street or whatever and your house. So there's a host of factors, but nonetheless there will be a speed test. I hope a lot of people do it because that can then feed into improving the quality of the information. But you've got to remember, and needless to say, when we did this work, people said, "Oh, it's not good enough. Why can't you tell what every single address, every single one of the 10 million addresses in Australia's line speed is?" Well, of course, you can't do that. But we do know that the major factors are obviously, distance from exchanges, RIMs. There are big factors in terms of the copper network that will affect availability, and we obviously know where HFC is, and we know what sort of wireless coverage there is. This is a very good piece of work. And look, I don't want to, conclude on a unduly partisan note, but just to give you an idea of the sheer madness of the way in which the Labor Party rolled out the NBN, leaving aside the whole madness of the government embarking on doing this itself. That's another question. But because they never bothered to ask the question, where is broadband good, bad, or indifferent, you've had, and I've been out there and seen it, you've got places where the NBN is overbuilding with fibre streets where you had 2 HFC services. So I've been to a precinct in Blacktown in Sydney where residents could get 100 meg service from Telstra on its HFC, or 100 meg service from Optus on their HFC, and that was getting fibre installed. And yet there are precincts not that far away which, because they're a long way from the exchange or they're on pair-gain systems, have got no broadband at all. I mean, if you're going to roll out a broadband network, let me tell you, there's only 2 ways you'd prioritise that rationally, and you've obviously got to try and do a bit of logic says you do a bit of both. One is to say, I'm going to prioritise high revenue potential areas first, because that will give me early cash flow that will help fund the rest of the rollout. That makes sense. The other one is to say, yep, that makes sense, but we're a public service, this is the government, we're addressing the digital divide, so let's target the areas as far as we can that have the worst service. Because if someone's on HFC now and they're getting 100 meg, sure, they're not getting 100 megs upload, but they're getting a pretty good service by any standard. They don't have to be done in the first few years. Let's target the people that have got nothing. And they didn't do that. And when I say it was mad, I find it extraordinary. And it is, I'm proud that, that our government has done this My Broadband exercise, broadband availability and quality exercise for the first time. And as I said, my department has done an outstanding job on pulling it together in the time. But boy, it is amazing that we've had so much talk about broadband and the digital divide, and nobody actually went out there, got the data, found out what data was available, and then pulled it together and then presented it. So on that note, cheery note, thank you all very much. I will now return to the legislature and cut some more red tape.